Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another double take. Today's double take features two versions of Dr Jekyll and Mr Hyde, but they're both interesting because they both don't go for the usual expected Mr Hyde being the same actor who plays Dr Jekyll, as in they just have bushy eyebrows and false teeth. They go for different variations with different levels of success, and opens up the Robert Louis Stevenson story to different avenues and different ideas. So we're looking at Hammer's Dr Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971, starring Ralph Bates and Martin Beswick. This is part of this German Hammer film Blu-ray box set, which is wonderful, which has 7 Hammers in it, including the Ralph Bates Frankenstein. And the other film is Valerian Borowicz's The Strange Case of Dr Jekyll and Miss Osbourne, or The Strange Case of Dr Jekyll and the Women, from 1981, starring Udo Kier and Patrick McGee. We'll start with the Hammer version. Now this film has its knockers, but I actually like this film a lot. I think it might actually be my second favourite Hammer film, which is quite bizarre behind The Devil Rides Out. So this one has Ralph Bates, who, if you watch British television in the 80s, you're used to him being kind of sad sack characters in sitcoms, but in his Hammer roles he actually plays quite terrible people. So in this one he plays Dr Jekyll, who in this version of the story, directed by Roy Ward Baker, he is a scientist who wants to find an antivirus drug, an elixir of life essentially, that will get rid of disease for all time, which is something we could do with, by using female hormones. He's successful at the start in changing the sex of a male fly to a female, and he becomes obsessed with this, but obviously when he takes this elixir he turns into Martin Beswick, which might not be a bad thing, who plays Mrs Hyde, because to cover her appearance up, he says that she's his sister, who's a widow. So he lives in a downstairs flat, and the upstairs flat is his love interest and her brother and her mother. And he also has a colleague who's in the profession, and is interested in his work, but at some point tells him he should give it up and you shouldn't meddle in things you're not supposed to meddle in. But what makes this version interesting, whether it's successful or not is up to you, but not only is it Dr Jekyll and Sister Hyde, it also throws in Burke and Hare, the grave robbers, because he needs a part of the anatomy, and Burke and Hare provide him with dead bodies. But then when something happens to Burke and Hare, he has to go out and kill to get that part himself. So it turns into a Jack the Ripper film as well. It's really atmospheric. It's Hammer, but it does look wonderful. And again, the female persona actually comes in handy, because as the investigation on Jack the Ripper increases, Dr Jekyll realises that they wouldn't be looking for a woman. So as Mrs Hyde, he then goes out and kills prostitutes. It's always prostitutes. These films, you would think that the only people that lived in Whitechapel were just prostitutes. So with the Sister Hyde, the Mrs Hyde character, she starts killing, but then there's an internal tug of war between the male side and the female side. It's actually a film that is about transgender people almost. Martine Beswick has that kind of look where she could actually be male or female a little bit in her cheekbones. So even though it's Hammer, and like I say, it has its knockers and some people don't like it, I think there's a lot more going on in between, because at one point Dr Jekyll in his female form is seducing the brother of his kind of love interest. You do kind of feel he's not really that interested in his love interest. So there's kind of homosexual undertones to it, there's kind of transgender undertones to it. I think if you haven't seen it for a long time, it's well worth a kind of a re-watch and a reassessment, because I think there's a lot going on. You could argue there's too much going on with the Burke and Hare stuff, the grave robber stuff, the Jack the Ripper stuff, as well as the Dr Jekyll and Mr Hyde riff. Ralph Bates is really good. Again, it's these scientists that are obsessed, so everything else is secondary. This nice kind of work between, as the Mrs Hyde character appears to certain people, and obviously they can't appear to everybody at the same time. There's some nice shots involving mirror work, obviously. There's a nice finale involving a stained glass window, which you really see the kind of the both sides of the personality. Obviously you can read it as it's about schizophrenia as well. It's about that masculine side and the feminine side. So for a Hammer horror film, which is not obviously horrific in any way, there is a lot going on, and there's a couple of wonderful punny one-liners, like a character asks Mrs Hyde about Dr Jekyll, and she says he hasn't been feeling himself for a while. His colleague, who is helping with the police investigating these murders, he says to Dr Jekyll, at one point, I want you to look in the mirror and see you're a changed man. So there's lots of wonderful lines like that. Also the first transformation, when Ralph Bates turns into a woman. Also there's an exploration of the female body. It's Hammer after all. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Does it work completely? Perhaps not, just because it throws in so many ideas, but I do think it's well worth a second look. As far as the gender things that are going on inside the film, it's a lot of fun, and again it really looks good in Blu-ray, and again this box set is really good if you can get it, and they all have really in-depth making of documentaries with people like Jonathan Rigby and John Johnson and Kevin Lyons talking about the production of the films. So that's the Hammer sex change version. So we'll move on to The Strange Case of Dr Jekyll and Miss Osbourne, or Jekyll and the Women. Again, these two are also good examples of, usually the women in these films are just the romantic subplot that are just kind of put to one side. But in both these films, women play a really important role. So this one stars Udo Kier, who's had quite the career, and he plays Dr Jekyll. This is a really odd film by Borowczyk, who came up from animation. I need to rewatch. I do have the box set about there. I do need to rewatch them because I saw them a long time ago. But this one is quite beautiful. It will remind you a little bit of Barry Lyndon by Kubrick, just because the use of diffuse light. So even though it's blue, the image isn't, pinpoint perfectly sharp, just because of the use of diffuse light. So it has this weird kind of atmosphere. It opens up with the hunting and beating of a child, which again is really atmospheric and really odd and really strange. The film pretty much takes place in one house which has many floors to it. At times it's actually a bit confusing to actually tell what's going on. It's a film that I really need to rewatch. I really enjoyed it and really liked it when I first watched it, but I think I'm going to have to rewatch it, because at times characters are running about a lot and going into rooms and out of rooms. They think Dr Jekyll's not in the house, but he is in the house. So again, this film does different things with the popular story. So it's a different actor that plays Mr Hyde. So it's not just, there's an interview about Udo Kier, which is really good, on the extras of this Arrow Academy release, where he talks about originally he was going to play both parts, but then Borowczyk decided to change it to another actor. So again, you do have that difference, which is quite interesting. The transformation scene is handled in a very unique and interesting way, which really works. The kind of film does have a kind of hysterical atmosphere. It's actually absurdly funny at times. So there's a group of guests who are in Dr Jekyll's house with his fiancée, Miss Osbourne, including Patrick McGee as a general. There's a doctor, somebody who opposes Dr Jekyll's beliefs and work. It's about transcendence and changing, but this is in powder form rather than a liquid form. I won't tell you what happens to the powder. You'll have to watch the film yourself. But again, there's attacks that are happening, so there's an investigation going on who's doing the attacking. Again, it's a strange film that perhaps doesn't make narrative sense. Like there's a scene to protect the women, they give them all shots of morphine in a room to knock them out. The film is very poetic and dreamlike, and again visually it's just absolutely beautiful. Udo Kier gives a really good performance, a really strange performance, as he tends to do. It is creepy. Again, you'll notice I'm not really talking about a plot, because there almost kind of isn't one. It's just very strange as these attacks happen in the house and they think it's an intruder, but obviously it's just Mr Hyde. It is fairly sexually explicit. It is an 18 for a reason. Again, some of the sexual assaults are on men, the sexual assaults on women. There's talk of being penetrated with something sharp. It's odd, dreamlike. Again, the use of the diffuse light, the transformation technique is unique and wonderful. It's just a really strange film, but again it's poetic and kind of wonderful at the same time, even although if you put at times if you put Scooby-Doo music to the characters running about the house, you will find yourself chuckling a little bit. But it kind of all makes sense in this world that Borowczyk creates. There's kind of a hint at the start of the film where there's a shot of the House of Commons, but it's kind of like a negative with kind of blue tone, so it's almost like, yes, this is London, but this is a strange London, and it's certainly a strange film, but it's also pretty wonderful. So I would highly recommend both these films. Objectively, probably The Strange Case of Dr Jekyll and Miss Osbourne is the better film, but I've always had a soft spot for Sister Hyde. So there's two films. I just thought I'd have a little chat about them because it's a traditional story, and like I say, it's easy to do the traditional thing of the same actor just with big bushy eyebrows and false teeth. But both these films do interesting things with the Mr Hyde character, and there's interesting underlying storylines and plots going on underneath, and they're both kind of wonderful. So thanks very much for watching. As always, I appreciate the support, and let me know in the comments what you think of these two films, which one's your favourite, or which is your favourite version of the Jekyll and Hyde story. The Dr Jekyll and Sister Hyde was the third attempt by Hammer at telling the story. But you can let me know in the comments what your favourite one is, and hopefully you'll join me again for more double take videos. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.